Hello friends, and welcome to this series of lectures on political participation and public opinion. There'll be several lectures and you have a number of readings that will look at all aspects of public opinion and participation in American politics. This lecture is going to be dedicated to looking at political participation. You'll recall from earlier in the semester we talked about the different types of government, different types of roles that people can play in political systems. And that's basically what we're doing again. The Wilson textbook talks about this at great length, and so I'm not going to try to duplicate the discussion of Wilson, but I'm holding you responsible for those talks nevertheless. There are a couple different descriptions of participation and different types of participation. Well, one of those is called elitism. In elitism, the question is asked, as it is in almost any form of political participation, is what role do people assume, the citizens of the country? In an elite system, the mass of the citizens are generally believed to be passive. We have a number of political systems like that in the world today. An alternative to that is what we call pluralism. And again, we ask basically the same question. What role should the citizens assume in that system? Or when we look at those systems, we're trying to analyze them as student politics. And many times in a pluralistic system, while all citizens are involved, the groups of citizens that we call interest groups, groups of citizens that come together and try to influence politics. Interest groups are very often quite active and quite engaged. Another approach that you'll see in the PowerPoints is articulated by Lester Milbrath. Now, Lester W. Milbrath is a name of a famous political scientist who looked at political participation in the 1960s and is really the sort of groundbreaking theorist of participation. Now, his name might best or most likely be witnessed by the average American citizen when they're watching Jeopardy and someone throws out a question about what is political participation and who's the godfather of political participation studies. And James Brown is the godfather of soul. Then Lester Milbrath is the godfather of political participation studies. And when Milbrath did his groundbreaking studies in the 60s, he said there's basically three categories of citizen participation. And we want to look at those three categories and for you to conceptualize how they might work themselves out. So Milbrath looks at three possible categories of political participation. Three types, three roles, if you will. The first role he talks about is what he calls the gladiatorial activities, the gladiator activities. And you know, gladiator brings something to mind. Bam! Action, excitement, sword, fighting lions, whatever. That rabble-rousing actor by the name of Crow, and they bring many things in mind. The only fellow I named, friend of mine, English scholar named Crow, is a Edmund Burke scholar. He'd never been in a fight in his life. I have to mow his yard sometimes. He doesn't know how to use more, not the Australian version of Crow. But nevertheless, a gladiator. Gladiator activities. What do we mean by that? Gladiator activities mean holding to the highest principles of the country, in most cases, being as engaged, the highest level of engagement. Think for a moment, what might be the highest level of political engagement that you can think of? What is it? Being the president? That's a gladiatorial activity. Running for office? Yes. Let's look at 6 kinds of gladiatorial activities that Milbrath identified in his great study of political participation in 1965. Holding public office. Hey, you can't be any higher than that. You run for office, you get elected, you govern. Man, that is the gladiatorial activity par excellence. If you serve in some political party office, too. Secondly, is running for office. Running for office, and we should mention this and describe this in the course of American politics, is very exciting, fascinating work. And I hope someday that you'll run for office. Maybe you'll even be inspired by this class. You're the future of the country. That's a cliche, but it's a reality too. It's not going to be old people like me. I'll be at the Methodist home. But the country's going to be in your hands. So running for office is another kind of gladiatorial activity. Raising money for political campaigns is another type of gladiatorial activity. Raising money. I mean, money is the mother's milk of politics. And so raising money is a natural and oftentimes good thing. It can be a quite more questionable thing. Fourth type of gladiatorial activity is going to a political caucus or strategy meeting. Is that participating in the decision-making process, the policy-making process, getting involved, playing a role in that. Okay. Fifth type of gladiatorial activity that Milbrath described was becoming an active member in a political party. There's no requirement in American politics that you become a member of a political party. A little over half of Americans are part of a political party. Actually, it might be higher than that. We'll talk about that when we come to political parties. Becoming an registering and participating in party functions. Political parties have a much higher level of participation in Europe than you do in the United States because we have these two large parties, these large tents of politics that all kinds of people fit in. In fact, if you say, I'm a Democrat, you sort of then have to say, I'm this sort of Democrat. If I'm a Republican, well, you know, I'm this sort of Democrat. I'm a Republican, and I look to this person's ideas. Okay, that brings us to Milbrath's second model of politics, which he calls a transitional activities or a transitional person. And this is sort of between leadership, which would be a gladiatorial activity, and the third category we're going to mention in a few moments called the spectator or spectator activities. Let's talk about transitional activities. Again, not as active as a gladiatorial or a gladiator, but not just a spectator too, somebody who's involved. What would be a transitional activity? Attending a political meeting or rally, going to a meeting, participating. Making a monetary contribution, usually a single contribution to a political candidate or political party. Writing a letter to a public official. Writing letters to the president, hey, I like what we're doing in country X to help the people of that country. Or Mr. President or Madam President, we need to get out of that country X immediately. Americans need to stay at home, solve the problems there. Okay, this brings us to our third level of activity, according to Milbrath, called spectator activity. First, we started gladiatorial, then we went to transitional. Now we're at the sort of lowest level of political participation. But still, it's a way of measuring political participation. There are some people who do not participate. Well, a spectator activity would be wearing a button or putting a sticker on your car. This is a very common practice, even in 21st century America. Another type of spectator activity would be talking to a friend or a family member and trying to get them to vote in a particular way. In my family, this happens almost every day. My wife and I do not agree on politics. We're not members of the same political party. We're always trying to convince the other one that our party has the best option. We're not successful, but we keep trying. But this happens in a much more informal and much more irregular manner in most American households. And it's still a way of political participation. Another type of spectator activity is starting a discussion. I was talking to a repairman yesterday, and he said, "Hey, what do you do for a living, Cheek?" And I said, "Well, I'm a professor." And he said, "Well, what do you teach?" And I said, "Well, I teach politics, political science." And immediately his question was, "What do you think about what's going on in Washington?" My repairman was engaging in a level of spectator participation. And I congratulated him on that. I did not tell him didn't mention to him that he had a friend in Lester Milbrath, but I appreciated what he did nevertheless. Another spectator activity is voting. Just going to vote. That's participating. It's a lower level activity than running for office or running a campaign, but it's still, it's not gladiatorial, It's not transitional, but it's a spectator version activity, and it's an important one nevertheless. The last is just exposing yourself to political stimuli. Watching the news shows on Sunday morning, watching the major political shows on one of the cable channels in the evening, picking up a political magazine like the New Republic or National Review or some other magazine to kind of encourage you to think about politics and government. Okay, so that's kind of an introduction to political participation. And we're going to pick up with the next lecture with interest groups and how interest groups are yet another version of how we participate in politics. Thank you.